Amen. For such a time as this, all of our lives have moments, life-changing moments. Moments that impact our lives and impact the lives of others. Moments in time that change our course of history. And moments in time that can change the entire course of history. What if Martin Luther hadn't posted his 95 Theses in the gate at Gutenberg? Many of us in here might still be Catholic. What if Nelson Mandela and others in South Africa and across the world never stood up against prejudice? Never stood up against unfair treatment simply because of the color of your skin. What might our world look like today? What if Susan B. Anthony and the other women of America hadn't stood up for women's rights and the right to vote, the right to run a business, the right to practice medicine or practice law? How might America look different today? How many of you have ever heard of Harold Yeager? Not many of you. 1989, there was a bit of confusing news that was coming out of East Berlin. And someone had thought that the Politburo in East Berlin had agreed to open the gates and allow a little free access between the East and the West for family visits and things like that. People in the East began to amass on the border at the gates, and a man named Harold Yeager, who was a border crossing guard in the East German army, called his boss and said, "There are an awful lot of people here, and they want to get in West Berlin. I've heard we're supposed to open the gates, or we're not supposed to open the gates. I don't know what to do." And his boss said, "Don't open the gates. Whatever you do, don't open the gates." Tens of thousands of people had amassed at the gate in which he was in charge of. As he stood there, he made a decision. He opened the gate. And that moment, as those tens of thousands of people flooded from East Germany to West Germany, the fall of the Iron Curtain began. In many ways because of Harold Yeager. What if you had never accepted Christ? How different might your life be today? How different might your eternity be today? We're talking about those for such a time as this moments in life and history. And today we're going to talk about Esther. Probably around 480 to 440 BC, before the coming of Christ, King Xerxes was king of Persia. In our story today, these are the four main characters. Esther. She was a young Jewish exile, selected by the king's eunuchs to be brought before him to replace the queen. We remember the queen wasn't very nice. She didn't treat the king too nicely. She was a little uppity. He says, "Well, I'll show her. I'll replace her." So he had all the most beautiful young women brought before him. And he chose her to reign as king. So Esther. Mordecai was a Jewish tribal leader. He was a thorn in the side of Haman. If you read through the book of Esther, Mordecai's always getting under Haman's skin. He was also Esther's uncle. Haman, our third character today, was sort of the king's right-hand man, the commanding officer, the one who was aspiring to be the very best he could be. But he was prejudiced against the Jews, and he hated Mordecai. And then we have Xerxes, the king of Persia. Those are our characters today in For Such a Time as This biblical story. Mordecai had angered Haman, and Haman conspired against Mordecai and all the Jews. He wanted to annihilate them once and for all. And the crux of our story is Mordecai coming to Esther and pleading with her to go before the king. So remember that Haman had sort of tricked the king into signing a decree that on such and such a date, everyone would rise up and take arms against all the Jews in Persia and kill them. And you wouldn't get in trouble. There was a movie out of Hollywood called The Purge. If you've not seen it, I would encourage you not to see it. Some of our young people have probably seen it. But it's sort of like a free pass day. You can kill anybody you want, and you can get away with it. Mordecai heard about this. Haman had built a gallows. He was going to hang Mordecai himself and have the other Jews annihilated. Mordecai goes to Esther and says, you have to go before the king. You can't let this happen. Well, as was tradition, you were not allowed to appear before the king unless you were summoned to appear before the king. If you go to Washington, D.C. anytime soon, it's sort of a comparison. Go ahead and hop the fence at the White House and see what happens. Okay? Hopefully you won't get too far. Some people have gotten pretty close to the White House. But if you had not been summoned before the king and you came into the king's presence, you would be killed unless he extended his scepter, his sword, his orb, his cane, his crook, whatever you want to call it, towards you, which then allowed you into the presence of the king. And Mordecai said, you have to go to the king and tell him what Haman has done and what's about to happen to us, to you. Don't think just because you're queen, you can escape this. Esther says, I haven't been called before the king in months. I just can't go in there. That's where we find ourselves in the scripture this morning. If you'll stand with me as we read out of the 4th chapter of the book of Esther. It says, when Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go gather together all of the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days or nights. I and my attendants will fast as you do. And when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. God bless the reading of his word. You can sit down. The rest of the story is quite clear. Esther and her handmaidens, they fast. Mordecai and the Jews across not only the city of Susa, but all of the Persian Empire fast and pray. And the moment comes that Esther must approach the king. Now, it's an interesting picture we hear. Imagine the royal hall, and the king is sitting upon his throne, and other than maybe a few guards and a few confidants, the hall is empty. And off on a side hallway, the king can hear the pitter-patter of steps. And I can only imagine Esther sort of peeking around the corner as she looks into the throne room. She's going to go. But I don't think she storms in like an angry person. I don't think she runs in like a crazy person. I think she goes in very meekly and mildly and humbly and sort of makes her way to the end of the throne room. The hall is out before us and the throne is down at the other end. And when King Xerxes sees her, he is pleased. So he extends his scepter, his cane, his crook, his orb, whatever you want to call it, which gives her freedom of access. Then what we see unfold from here is her plan to expose Haman. She says, King, I would like to invite you and Haman to a special meal. And they come to the meal. Haman feels honored and respected. She invites them to another meal. It's there that she sort of springs her trap. Haman is exposed. He's hung on his own gallows that he had built to hang Mordecai. Mordecai is honored. And all the Jews are saved, right? No. Actually, they're not. When Esther says, please rescind this order you've given, he says, I can't. He says, it is written, and it will be done. He says, but I will send another word that the Jews may take up arms against anyone who tries to kill them, that they can defend themselves against this onslaught that's coming. And the onslaught did come. And Jews were killed. But many more who fought against the Jews were killed than Jews. And Israel, in exile in Persia, was delivered by Esther at such a time as this. Mordecai said, and who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. This was such an overwhelming victory for Israel that they commemorated this with a holiday that is still celebrated by Israelites around the world. It's called Purim. It's the day they celebrate not only the defeat of Haman, but God's deliverance of Israel again. Some people say, well, how do you know it was God? You all are aware that God's name is not found at all in the book of Esther. It's the only book in the Bible where God is not mentioned. Matter of fact, Esther barely squeaked into the canon for that very fact. Because there's no mention of God. But the fact of the matter is, you don't need to see God or to say His name to know He's at work. And I think that that's a beautiful picture in the book of Esther, is that we can see God at work even though we don't hear His name or we see His face or don't see His face. We know that God is at work. And in our lives, that's exactly how we should see things. Because we don't always hear His voice. We don't always see His face. We don't always hear His name. But as the things come into our lives for such a time as this, it's time for us to step up and to do the right thing because God is at work. Some of you are experiencing some difficult things in your life right now, and you go, how in the world can God be at work in this? I don't know the answer specifically to your situations, but all I can say is have faith and trust, persevere, and let God work. If we go back to Esther, Esther was called to break protocol. She was called to disobey tradition. She was asked to break the law. Oh, that's not good stuff. My goodness. Protocol's there for a reason, right? Because that's how things work. Tradition is there for a reason because that's how it's always been. The law is there for a reason because it keeps everyone safe. But in those for such a time as this moments in life, do we step beyond the status quo for the greater good? When is it right to be wrong? Let me ask that again. When is it right to be wrong? When is it the right thing to do what everyone else says is the wrong thing? Esther was told to go before the king. That was the wrong thing. You weren't invited. You can be killed. But she did it for such a time as this. Might God call us to break with tradition, sidestep protocols, or disobey the law? I think at times He does. That does not excuse you for speeding this afternoon on the interstate or for shoplifting a Twinkie at the grocery store. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about life-changing moments where everybody around you says, "Oh, no, you shouldn't do that. Don't take that new job. Don't go to that school. Don't have that next baby. Don't marry that person. Don't buy that house. Don't join that church." But you know in your heart and you know in your gut that that's the right thing to do. And everybody looks at you like you have a third eye in the middle of your forehead. But you do it because God said so. Right in your heart, you know it to be the right thing to do. Sometimes it is right to go against protocol or to break tradition. Sometimes it's right to do the wrong thing. Because when God calls you to be extraordinary, He gives you an opportunity to change the world. Your world, your family's world, and maybe the world beyond. World changers, life changers. If we just stay doing the status quo, if we just accept tradition forever and ever, if we just do what we're told simply for the sake of it, we are not going to be life changers. And we're not going to be world changers. I remember the story of the missionary group that went to a tribe in South America who'd never heard the gospel. And they landed their plane and they were attacked. All these missionaries were killed. Well, God must have told them, That was the wrong place to go, right? Couldn't have been God's will. Couldn't have been God's purpose. These were missionaries. They were there to share the gospel, and they were killed by a bunch of headhunters. See, but things didn't stop there. Another group went, and another group went. Eventually that tribe listened to the gospel. Many of that tribe were saved. Their lives were changed, and that whole little microcosm of a little world in and of itself heard about Jesus. To one point, the son of one of those original missionaries who'd been killed by the headhunters went himself to that tribe and met the man who'd killed his father. I heard both of them speak one time. And that tribal headhunter who accepted Christ became like a father to that young man missionary. Like a father whose father he had killed decades before. That's for such a time as this moment. How many sons would go willingly to a place where their father died to love and forgive rather than seek revenge? How many of us, when somebody says something negative about us on Facebook or Snapchat or XYZ.com, would offer a hand of friendship and forgiveness rather than a biting comment in return? Oh, I'll just type this and zing, it's gone, and yeah, I got them back. How many of us are willing to step beyond the status quo and to go that extra mile for such a time as this? So that's the challenge today. That's the challenge moving forward into this week. That you can be willing to do something that everybody else says is wrong or impossible for the cause of Christ. Everybody else says you're just crazy to even think about it. You're crazy to try it. You're too young. You're too old. You don't have the education. You don't have the background. You don't have the ability. No one needs to tell us that. We've told ourselves all of that. But see, when God says, that's okay, I'll take care of it. Just go. Just do. Just be for me. That's all He's asking us today. No matter what else is going on in your life, and like I said, a lot of you are going through a lot of stuff right now. And that's the easiest time to simply say, no thanks, God. Not today. Not for me. I'm sticking to the well-traveled path. Maybe it's a time like that when things are at their rockiest, that it's the safest to follow Him. Amen. If God has laid something on your heart today that you need to respond to, turn to the person on your left, turn to the person on your right. Find that special someone here in the congregation that you trust and love. Just go on over to them and say, hey, can you pray for me this week? Or I've got a need, or I've got a concern, or I'm worried, or I just need to tell somebody I messed up. Take this time of invitation and do that. If you feel compelled to come forward, make a public confession of faith or forgiveness or to give a testimony or to tell a story, God calls you forward, come. Just have a seat up here. If you don't know Jesus, there is no better time than now to meet him. Respond as God calls.